suppose some of the bigger stuff is, 6, 7 inches tall or something like that now. So it's coming right along. It's really, it gets to this growth stage, it really takes off.
Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlon Bowling with you. It's a pleasure to have you with us here. Just a quick little reminder, make sure you like these videos and subscribe to them. You know how you do that? You click that little bell icon down below, and that way we'll let you know. We'll notify you every time we have a new episode that gets published. And be sure and share this video with others as well. Well, my very special guest this time around is Steve Melvin, and he is an extension agronomist, I guess you would say, or an extension educator with the University of Nebraska, based in Lincoln. And Steve, I know you kind of wear several hats. Explain what your real title is and the territory you serve.
Yeah, I work for the University of Nebraska Lincoln and in an extension area, which base us out across the state. And my office happens to be in Central City, Nebraska, which is kind of the east central part of the state. And do general county things, but also my specialty is in irrigation equipment and irrigation management. And so that's really a lot of where I spend my time. A lot of it's here fairly local, but some of it's statewide. And so just have kind of a variety of things that we do.
Okay, planting season in Nebraska, how did it go overall? Do you still have areas that are having issues trying to get the crop in the ground?
Yeah, it's been a whole different year. Last year we were so dry, and you could kind of go to the field and do whatever you wanted on about any day all spring long. And this year we've actually been blessed with some incredible rains, but of course along with that comes some planting delays, and so there's been some across the state. Of course, we didn't get things planted as timely as we'd like to, but at this point in the region where I'm at, most everything's planted. There's still a few guys rolling yet with some crops, and eastern Nebraska had some fairly significant flooding here a week or so ago, and unfortunately they're going to probably have to spot some things back in and things. But in general, yeah, Nebraska's behind schedule a little bit on planning, but it's getting towards the tail end of everything on it.
How does this year compared to a year ago?
Well, certainly we're behind this year compared to last year. Last year, like I say, you go to the field about any day you wanted to, or the last 2 or 3 years, as far as that goes, we've had really dry springs. But compared to a year ago, we're definitely behind. But again, we're getting things pretty well wrapped up here. We're clear to the end of May, and a lot of guys are liking to get corn in the central part here, by the 5th or the 10th of May. And so, and then soybeans really has traditionally been planted after corn, but this year and the last few years, we planted a lot of soybeans before we started corn. Soils were a little cold when we wanted to start back in April, and a lot of guys just went ahead and put a bunch of soybeans in, and they seem to handle that just a little bit better, and certainly having a longer growing season is a yield plus for soybeans. Instead of, traditionally we'd kind of planted them after the 15th of May and into June, and anymore guys are figuring that they get them planted, and research has certainly shown that if we can get them planted, by the 5th or 10th of May, we get a better yield than if we plant them later.
Well, you alluded to last year you could plant just about any time you wanted because it was pretty open weather. However, last year, if I remember right, a lot of the area, a lot of that region was starved for moisture as you got into the growing season then, right?
For sure. Last year was kind of the 4th year where we'd been pretty dry in parts of the state, and certainly here was not an exception. And part of what added to last year was the fact that the 22 growing season was so incredibly dry, and then just no over the winter moisture at all, and coming into the spring. And so yeah, a lot of guys were needing to run the center pivots right away just to get enough moisture to get things to come up, and a lot of challenges. The lot of cattle in Nebraska as well, of course, and so the grass never really took off last year either, and so it was really a tough situation for the cattle guys that typically turn the cattle out and get to grazing some good quality grass. But last year we just really didn't have that, and this year that is phenomenally different. It's not like it would be on a normal really wet year, because again we've had some dry years and the grass just hasn't done as well as it might have if it hadn't have been so drought stressed a year ago. The interesting thing a year ago was the fact that the western end of the state was pretty wet after it got started raining, and compared to normal years, but in the eastern half of the state, we stayed dry pretty much all summer.
You brought up something where Nebraska holds a real advantage. Maybe it's not the best farmland, producing farmland in the country, but you do have irrigation to fall back on in a lot of
Mhm.
areas there. And that can really save the day, at least in Nebraska and surrounding areas.
Yeah, Nebraska's got more irrigated acres than any state in the nation, and it really pays out on those dry years. The energy bill from electricity or diesel that you're pumping the water with gets to be a big bill that year, but it's either that or not have much of anything. And so, those are the years it really pays off well to have irrigation, and it's a extremely valuable thing for Nebraska. A lot of the seed corn's produced here because of that consistency. You've got lots of good, clear, sunny days because we don't get as much rain as other parts of the country, but we certainly can put the water to it anyway and get a good, more uniform production year in and year out.
So when you talk about your earlier planted corn, the stuff that got in on time, how big is it right now?
Oh, I suppose some of the bigger stuff is, 6, 7 inches tall or something like that now. So it's coming right along. It's really, it gets to this growth stage, it really takes off now. I guess I didn't over the weekend here look at too much of it, but it's up in that range. I guess um, and then there's still some that's pretty small yet. But yeah, some of that bigger stuff, it's been up for a few weeks now, and it's really hitting a time when it grows up tall in a hurry.
Have you had any guys that had to turn on the irrigation sprinkler systems just to get the crop to come up or maybe to activate the chemical out there?
Yeah, putting some water down after we put the herbicide on is certainly something that we do pretty common, and so a lot of guys have done that. This year we've had enough consistent rain that typically you can go for 4 or 5 days without worrying about your herbicide on the soil surface, and we've had a lot of that this spring, and but there's still been a few guys put the pivot on and water in the herbicide. Maybe they put some nitrogen on. They want to put that into the soil, and then sometimes, you just end up with some soil conditions that maybe you work the ground a little bit wet or something, and it's not quite as good a seed to soil contact as you want. And you can certainly help that out with putting some water on the center pivot. So, center pivots to right after planting are fairly common in a lot of Nebraska, and there was a few of those ran this year. But really, we've had pretty good rains. Most guys just waited for the rain.
Well, we were talking before we started this interview here, and you've done extensive work with water conservation and monitoring what the water tables are doing
Hmm.
in different parts of the Ogallala Aquifer, like in southwest Nebraska, right? I just
Hmm.
wondered how it's holding up these days.
Well, certainly you get these really dry years, it takes a hit. There's no two ways about it. Right here in the Platte Valley is a very interesting aquifer in that we have, it's very shallow. There's a lot of places that, if you get a really wet year, we've got ground that water table, comes up to the surface, and then those fields don't even get planted. But it drops pretty fast too on these dry years, and so we've had some recovery from that right here locally, just from the rains that we've had. And but with deeper aquifers, a lot of the rest of the state, it takes a long time for that water to make it back down there, and so you don't really see any speedily recovery. But yeah, certainly the aquifers have taken a hit. You just pump that much more water out than a normal year, it drops things some in some places.
Do you have any restrictions on pumping this year?
Well, there's quite a few restrictions around Nebraska on how much water you can actually pump. Uh, right here in the local area, they just limit how many acres that you can irrigate. It had to be certified at a point in the past. I forget, it's been quite a few years ago now. You can't add any more acres. But a lot of the places in the state, particularly as you get farther west, they limit how much water you can pump. Typically, it's kind of a rolling average over like 3 to 5 years that you can pump, X amount of inches of water over a number of years. That way, if you get a wetter year, you don't pump as much. You can save it for a drier year, and on a drier year, you can use it. And so but yeah, there's quite a few restrictions in Nebraska anymore on how much water can be pumped.
You bring up a good point talking about how close that water table can get to the surface of the ground. In central Nebraska, I used to work out there, and I know that was a problem where they really had to closely monitor how much nitrogen they put on the ground so it didn't leach down into that water table there. And now with the wet year this year, is that a problem in some areas where that nitrogen is leaching away from the crop?
Well, time will tell. I mean, that's kind of the case anywhere, it's not unique to Nebraska, but particularly in the sandier soils, we put some fertilizer on in the spring ahead of time and then we get a bunch of rain and it could certainly lose some of it. Of course, we hate for that for two reasons. One, we already paid for it and we were planning on it for our crop this year, and then it ends up in the groundwater. Nobody wants it there. So it's something we try to avoid with some stabilizers and timely applications and things. But certainly, yeah, you get extra water if the nitrogen is in a form that's leachable, which we can put things on. Anhydrous is pretty stable, and then there's some stabilizers that'll help keep it in the nitrogen when we put it on in a form that will not leach with the water. And so we focus on that, but still. What's mineralized out of the soil is going to be pretty leachable. And so yeah, it's a concern. We're going to have to play it by ear and kind of see whether we got to put some more on. I mean, with center pivot irrigation makes it pretty handy to put some more back on with chemigation. We can set up an injection pump and put some nitrogen into the water going out to the machine and put on, 30, 40, 50 pounds if we need to with pretty readily. In fact, a lot of guys, to try to prevent the nitrogen from leaching away and not being available for the crop as well as getting into the groundwater, use chemigation every year because it's a way to put the nitrogen on a timely manner, right when the crop is needing it. And so that works out well. And we'll have to see. We'll monitor the corn and see if it gets a little short of nitrogen after all the rain, and we may add some more based on that.
Yeah, kind of spoon feed it on demand, right?
That's right. Yeah, it works really well.
All right. Since I got out of the farming in about 2002, ethanol production in Nebraska has really gone big time. And I just wondered how that is going now, how that is affecting producers like where you are. You're right in the heart of it, aren't you?
Yeah, there's a ethanol plant right here, just a few miles from my office, and a couple others not, that many miles away. So yeah, there's a lot of ethanol produced in this area, and it makes a big difference. I mean, it's a local market for the corn. We don't have huge numbers of livestock right here locally, a fair number, but otherwise we end up exporting the corn, and so if we can take it to the ethanol plant, it certainly is an advantage price wise for the growers here. And the industry seems to be doing pretty well, so, or at least locally here it is.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. I appreciate that very much. I'll let you get back to what you're doing. Steve Melvin is with the University of Nebraska in Lincoln Extension, and he is based in Central City, Nebraska. Well, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlon Bowling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.